think Gavon need to do from here on out?
He need to make himself a wheel and go pick out his casket and shit. But shit like that. That's all he need to go do.
Imagine beating one of the biggest murder cases in Memphis history, only to realize the streets don't care about your legal victory. Hernandez Gavon walked out of court legally innocent, but the city that watched young Dolph die wasn't ready to forgive or forget. Glock, Dolph's protege and brother-in-arms, exploded on social media with a post that shook Memphis to its core: "My city failed." And just like that, Gavon went from freedom to a target. The rapper allegedly behind the $100K bounty? None other than Glock himself, or at least that's how the streets saw it. Every move Gavon makes is now under scrutiny. Paper route affiliates are warning him to pick out his casket, while social media buzzes with threats, accusations, and promises of street justice. Meanwhile, federal eyes are watching because bounties, revenge, and organized crime cross legal lines quickly. What's worse, the so-called mastermind behind young Dolph's murder wasn't even guilty. The prosecution's star witness, a desperate snitch, crumbled under cross-examination, exposing lies, manipulated phone records, and fabricated narratives. Gavon survived 26 years of criminal charges, multiple shootings, and personal loss, only to see legal victory traded for permanent exile in his own city. This isn't just a story about law and crime. It's about street politics, betrayal, and survival in Memphis hip-hop, where freedom in court doesn't always mean freedom in life. What happens next could spark federal investigations, violent retribution, or a whole new chapter that Memphis may never forget. After the shock of Glock's "My City Failed" post, Hernandez Gavon had no time to breathe. Legally, he was free, acquitted of first-degree murder, attempted first-degree murder, and conspiracy charges. But in Memphis, freedom wasn't measured by a judge's gavel. It was measured by respect, fear, and survival in the streets. And for Gavon, the streets were buzzing louder than ever. Every phone call, every social media post, every movement was being dissected. The city was watching, and the online world was adding fuel to the fire. To understand the chaos that followed, we have to rewind decades. Hernandez Gavon, known on the block as Gone, wasn't just another man caught in the streets. He had spent 26 years cycling in and out of prison, navigating charges from drug possession to aggravated assault, firearms, and organized crime ties. He grew up in Orange Mound, Memphis, a neighborhood famous for producing legends like 8 Ball and MJG, but also infamous for its violence and street politics. Gone's connections ran deep family ties, street alliances, and a history with some of the city's heaviest hitters. He wasn't just surviving, he was learning how the game worked. By 2021, Gavon was trying to pivot. After decades in the streets, he wanted out. He had a vision: transition from street hustler to music mogul, signing young talent, and finally building something that could secure his family's future. One of those young artists was Justin Johnson, aka Straight Drop. Through mutual connections like Big Juke, Gone saw a legitimate opportunity to pull a young rapper into CMG Records. He was focused on music, not murder. But the legal system wasn't interested in music ambitions. 2 days before the fatal shooting of young Dolph on November 17, 2021, Gone had arranged a meeting at his Orange Mound home with Big Juke to listen to Straight Drop's music, plan promotion strategies, and discuss signing deals. It was a routine business meeting, the kind Gone had hoped would mark his clean exit from street life. But then Cornelius Smith showed up, a known pillhead connected to Gone through his deceased god brother Bobby Carter. Smith was desperate, street talk wild, and instantly involved Gone in conversations that prosecutors later spun into a murder plot. According to the prosecution, this interaction with Smith was the spark that allegedly set the murder plan into motion. They claimed Gone orchestrated the entire hit on young Dolph for a $20,000 payout. But the truth, according to Gone, was far different. He brushed Smith off and went back inside to continue the music meeting, refusing to be dragged into street scheming that had nothing to do with him. Fast forward to the day of the shooting. Young Dolph, known for his annual Thanksgiving turkey drive, was at Makida's homemade butter cookies, giving back to the Memphis community. Two shooters, Justin Johnson and Cornelius Smith, arrived in a white Mercedes-Benz, carrying out the fatal attack. Gaon's home, his safe space, where he was mentoring straight drop, became the subject of rumors and misdirection when the murder weapon was abandoned right across the street. It was chaos, and the prosecution painted Gaon as the mastermind, even though the weapon's placement suggested panic and inexperience, not strategic planning. The city of Memphis erupted. Social media exploded with speculation. Glock, who had a personal relationship with Dolph, felt betrayed by the legal outcome. Kenny Money and Paper Route Empire began to publicly threaten Gavon, accusing him of being a federal informant. "Pick out your casket," they said. Suddenly, Gavon's legal victory was overshadowed by street threats and public outrage. Behind the scenes, Gaon's defense attorney, Manny Aurora, was working tirelessly to expose the prosecution's fabrication. The case relied almost entirely on Cornelius Smith's testimony, a man facing life in prison who was willing to say anything to save himself. Aurora dismantled manipulated phone records, false narratives, and circumstantial evidence piece by piece. He showed that no incriminating messages, recordings, or financial transactions connected Gaon to the assassination plot. The trial itself was intense but brief, with the jury deliberating for only about 3 hours over 2 days. When the verdict came back, Hernandez Gavon was free. But freedom in the courtroom didn't translate to safety in the streets. Glock's social media posts, combined with threats from Paper Route affiliates, made it clear legal victory didn't mean street victory. For Gaon, this wasn't just about surviving a murder trial. It was about navigating a world where the line between legality and street credibility is razor thin. A man can win in court yet lose in the culture that ultimately decides who lives and dies. Gaon, now 45, had to plan a future that included exiting Memphis safely, rebuilding his life, and protecting his family, all while being constantly aware of the dangers surrounding him. The irony is staggering. Hernandez Gavon had spent years trying to leave the streets behind, investing in music and legitimate business, only to be dragged back into the very environment he hoped to escape. The social media backlash, the threats, the bounty rumors, all of it underscores one harsh reality. In Memphis hip-hop, the court of public opinion can be as deadly as any courtroom. We see Hernandez Gavon at a crossroads, legally free, but under siege socially, culturally, and physically. The next steps he takes could determine whether he finally secures the life he's been fighting for or becomes a target in a city that never forgets. The story of Gaon is more than a legal battle. It's a lesson in survival, street politics, and the brutal cost of living at the intersection of hip-hop and crime. Even though Hernandez Gavon had won in court, the streets weren't ready to let him breathe. Glock's social media post, "My City Failed," was more than just words. It was a public declaration that Gaon had crossed a line in the culture. In Memphis, legal innocence doesn't cancel street accountability, and PR crews like Paper Route Empire, PRE, had made it clear the verdict meant nothing to them. The tension began to boil over immediately. Kenny Money and other affiliates openly called Gaon a federal informant, accusing him of cutting deals with law enforcement. Paper Route went further, warning Gavon to leave Memphis or pick out his casket. These weren't idle threats. They were loaded messages that could trigger violence if ignored. Social media amplified every rumor, and Memphis streets buzzed like a pressure cooker. Every post, every comment, and every viral clip added fuel to an already dangerous fire. Behind the chaos, Hernandez Gavon had to make careful moves. Despite being legally free, he remained under GPS monitoring from his bail conditions and had to navigate public attention without slipping into old street patterns. At 45, he had spent decades dodging bullets, prison sentences, and betrayal, and now he was faced with a different kind of survival game, one that required strategy, discretion, and planning an exit. The federal angle loomed large. Any discussion of a bounty on Gaon's head wasn't just street talk. It could trigger a serious federal investigation, including charges of conspiracy, racketeering, or organized criminal activity. Even if PRE's threats were intended to intimidate, the feds monitor social media closely when money, murder, and interstate communications are involved. Gavon's legal team was aware of the risks, and they advised extreme caution. Meanwhile, Glock and Paper Route Empire were dealing with their own grief and anger. Dolph had been more than a mentor. He was a father figure, a protector, and the backbone of PRE. Glock's frustration wasn't just about Gavon walking free. It was about a system that he felt undervalued street lives and justice. For Glock, the legal system failed, and now the streets had to respond. But the line between revenge and lawlessness was thin, and PRE risked federal attention if they acted recklessly. While all this unfolded, Hernandez Gavon focused on rebuilding his life. His 15-year-old autistic son was his anchor, the reason Gavon fought to take the 10-year plea deal initially. The boy's need for his father drove Gavon's decision-making. He couldn't let the streets dictate the rest of his life. He also started preparing for a possible relocation from Memphis, aiming to secure a safe environment for his kids. Gavon openly said in interviews that he wanted to leave Tennessee to protect his family from the dangers that had haunted his own childhood. The city, however, wasn't ready to forgive. Every old ally, every enemy, and every opportunist was watching Gavon's moves. Rumors of street justice circulated, and bounty talk grew louder. Even without actual attempts, the perception of danger forced Gavon to remain vigilant. For him, survival now meant balancing legal freedom, street credibility, and family protection simultaneously. Federal investigators began to take notice. While no official charges were filed against Glock or PRE affiliates for the bounty chatter, law enforcement monitored all communications. Any misstep could escalate into interstate conspiracy charges, potentially undoing years of legal battles. Gavon had narrowly avoided life in prison, and now he had to navigate a world where social media threats could trigger legal consequences just as deadly as bullets. Despite the chaos, Hernandez Gavon started rebuilding financially. Aurora, his attorney, had taken the case partially pro bono, recognizing the family stakes and flaws in the prosecution's narrative. The victory didn't come cheap. Most clients would have spent $800,000 to $1 million, but it bought Gavon a rare chance to start over. He began investing in music projects, business ventures, and protective measures for his family, understanding that wealth and safety were intertwined in his world. PRE, meanwhile, was navigating their own strategy. Glock remained vocal about Dolph's legacy, ensuring that his mentor's influence on Memphis hip-hop stayed alive. Social media, music, and public statements became tools to reinforce street authority, but the line between mourning and retaliation remained blurred. For Glock and affiliates, Gavon's freedom represented a cultural and emotional threat, not just a legal anomaly. The story also exposed broader truths about Memphis and hip-hop culture. Legal victories didn't always translate to safety, and street justice often operated parallel to formal law. Gavon's case highlighted the disconnect between court decisions and community sentiment, where perception could be as dangerous as reality. Even after beating charges, Gavon faced exile from the city. He grew up in a city that had shaped him, molded him, and now threatened him. Meanwhile, Gavon maintained focus on his personal goals. He continued mentoring young artists, building music projects, and attempting to transition fully into legitimate business. Every move required calculated discretion. One wrong step could reignite conflict. At the same time, he had to protect his family, particularly his son, from exposure to the dangers that had surrounded him for decades. Hernandez Gavon's freedom was not absolute. Courtrooms can declare innocence, but in Memphis, the streets ultimately decide fate. Gavon survived the most dangerous legal battle of his life, but now he faced a different test, navigating the constant tension between survival, family, business, and street politics. Glock and Paper Route Empire, driven by loyalty to Dolph, would continue monitoring him. Social media would continue to amplify every rumor, threat, or action. And federal authorities were silently observing, ready to act if the line between street retaliation and federal crime was crossed. The stakes are set. Hernandez Gavon has won in court, but is still fighting for life on the streets. Every decision matters, every relationship is scrutinized, and the shadows of the past threaten to determine the future. Memphis, CMG, and Paper Route Empire are all players in a high-stakes game, and for Gavon, the story is far from over. His survival, redemption, and legacy depend on strategy, discretion, and timing. One wrong move could turn legal freedom into a street sentence that lasts a lifetime. Even though Hernandez Gavon had walked free, the streets of Memphis weren't ready to forgive. Courtrooms had cleared him, but in the culture that dictated real consequences, freedom on paper didn't equal freedom on the streets. Social media and word of mouth made sure that Gavon's every move was under scrutiny. Every step outside his house, every meeting, every post online, people were watching, judging, and waiting. Glock remained vocal, his anger and grief palpable. "My city failed," he had said, and the sentiment spread across Memphis. For Glock, this wasn't just a verdict, it was a failure of the system to protect his mentor and the values he stood for. Paper Route Empire, PRE, wasn't about to accept Gavon's legal win as a street victory. Threats continued to circulate, some veiled, some explicit, warning Gavon that leaving Memphis safely would require more than luck. Federal authorities, quietly observing the social media chatter, began taking a closer look. Any conversation or transaction linked to threats, bounties, or retaliation could trigger serious federal consequences. Interstate conspiracy, organized crime, racketeering, all of it could be in play. Gavon's legal team made it clear, every move had to be calculated. The wrong step could undo the years of fighting in court and risk his life in a different way. Meanwhile, Hernandez Gavon focused on rebuilding his family and business. At 45, with decades of street experience and a nearly lifelong criminal record behind him, Gavon knew that survival now meant strategic planning. His son, especially, remained his priority. The boy's autism made stability essential, and Gavon was determined to create an environment far removed from the dangers he had grown up with. Rebuilding meant entering the music industry with caution. Gavon's connections, including Big Juke and Straight Drop, gave him opportunities, but he had to navigate carefully. He couldn't associate openly with known street figures without risking new conflicts, yet he needed allies who understood Memphis's music and culture. Every handshake had weight, every meeting a test of trust. PRE, on the other hand, continued to assert influence. Glock, Kenny Money, and other affiliates used social media and community connections to maintain authority. Their actions were a mixture of public mourning, intimidation, and legacy preservation. Glock's grief was personal. Young Dolph had discovered him, mentored him, and built a movement around him. Losing Dolph was a wound that no legal outcome could heal. The tension between legal freedom and street consequences became clear. Gavon might have survived the court case, but the streets had their own rules. Threats of picking out a casket or being labeled a federal informant weren't just words. They were social currency in a world where reputation and perceived weakness could determine life or death. Gavon had to remain cautious, aware, and strategic at every turn. In the months following the trial, Gavon began to plan his exit from Memphis. Leaving was about safety and opportunity. His children deserved a life away from constant threats, and Gavon wanted to build a legitimate business empire to protect them. But relocation wasn't easy. The cost of moving, combined with the legal fees he had already paid, meant he was essentially starting over at 45, with the eyes of the city still on him. Meanwhile, the broader Memphis community watched the situation unfold. Many were polarized. Some believed Gavon had manipulated the system. Others recognized the prosecution's case was built on unreliable testimony from Cornelia Smith. The trial had exposed flaws in legal processes, highlighting how desperate snitches and manipulated evidence could nearly ruin an innocent life. Yet, public opinion in Memphis wasn't always fair. Perception often mattered more than reality. Glock continued to carry young Dolph's legacy. His music, social media posts, and public appearances were all tools to honor Dolph while asserting influence over Memphis culture. But Glock also knew the streets were unpredictable. Gavon's legal freedom didn't guarantee physical safety, and every public statement or movement could escalate tensions. The line between protection and retaliation was thin. Hernandez Gavon, meanwhile, focused on survival strategy. He limited public appearances, avoided unnecessary contact with street figures, and started building a network of allies in music and business who could provide both opportunity and protection. For him, every decision had a dual purpose: grow his life and protect his family. The case also exposed systemic issues in Memphis and beyond. Many residents lacked access to high-quality legal representation like Gavon had with Manny Aurora. Aurora's willingness to take the case largely pro bono, combined with rigorous cross-examination and evidence analysis, had been crucial. Without such resources, Gavon might have spent life in prison based on fabricated claims. The story highlighted how justice can hinge on access to resources, not just truth. Social media remained a double-edged sword. It amplified threats, public outrage, and rumor, but it also provided Gavon with a platform to control his narrative subtly. Interviews, music projects, and behind-the-scenes collaborations became tools to assert his legitimacy while maintaining a low profile. Gavon learned to use digital influence as a protective and strategic tool, rather than a source of vulnerability. The streets, however, didn't wait for him to adapt. Bounty chatter, threats, and accusations continued circulating months after the trial. Gavon's team constantly monitored potential risks, understanding that one misstep could provoke violence or federal attention. Every alliance, every investment, every relationship had to be carefully managed to avoid unnecessary exposure. Even as Gavon worked to build a safer life, Glock and PRE continued asserting their cultural authority. The murder of young Dolph had left a void in Memphis hip-hop, and Glock's leadership became a combination of legacy preservation and street enforcement. While Gavon had survived the legal system, PRE represented the community's memory of Dolph, and for them, Gavon's presence was still a threat to honor and reputation. Hernandez Gavon also reflected on the personal cost. Losing his daughter to violence, enduring multiple family deaths, and surviving decades in the criminal justice system had taken a toll. Legal freedom was a victory, but emotional and psychological scars remained. He had to navigate grief, trauma, and ongoing threats while trying to transition into legitimate business and fatherhood. The picture is clear. Hernandez Gavon had achieved what few ever could: legal victory against nearly insurmountable odds. But freedom didn't equate to safety. The streets, social media, and federal scrutiny created a complex web of challenges. Every move was calculated, every alliance carefully considered. Gavon's fight wasn't over. It had shifted from courtroom battles to survival strategy. The final lesson: in Memphis, winning in court is just the beginning. Street politics, cultural loyalty, and perception can outweigh legal rulings. Hernandez Gavon's story is a cautionary tale for anyone who thinks that legal innocence guarantees safety. The court system may declare a man free, but in a city where streets enforce their own rules, freedom comes at a price. For Gavon, that price is constant vigilance, strategic thinking, and the hope that one day, he and his family can live a life free from both legal entanglements and street retaliation. Glock and Paper Route Empire will continue to monitor him, the streets will continue to talk, and federal authorities will continue watching. In Memphis, the story is never truly over. It just evolves, and Hernandez Gavon has learned that survival is about playing the long game.